A long, long time ago, before the first Gita ever walked upon the soil of Sanctuary, all centaurs lived in harmony in a beautiful, magic-rich forest amongst other fantastical creatures, big and small. However, the centaurs, magical though they were not made for a life of weaving through thickets and trees. Deep down, they yearned for the vast expanse of the plains, running wild and free, nothing and nobody to stop them. Thus, the first tribe of centaurs was born. Small in numbers but great in spirit, they left the forest to roam the grassy plains, running as free as the wind for many, many years. But a great change was brewing. Nobody's sure why it happened. There is even much doubt as to when exactly. But eventually, by some miracle, the first centaur child was born. Many more were to follow, until the barren grasslands were teeming with the sound of little galloping hooves. But all good things must come to an end, and so did the life of the first centaur. It was unprecedented, to say the least. Nothing like this had ever happened before, though it's undeniable that things were changing. After the birth of the first centaur child, everyone had been different. Over time, supple skin began to sag, vibrant hair began to dull and gray, and eventually, strong muscles weakened and weakened until they could go on no longer. The first to go was the leader of the original tribe, though split into many it had become. From him, all centaurs considered themselves descended, as he alone could claim the title of the first to exist. But only a special few could truly lay claim to such roots, and one such individual found himself stricken by grief. The firstborn child of all of centaur kind, descended directly from the very first of the species himself, bore the name Lepisma, and his father's death weighed heavily upon his soul. He feared that if he didn't act quickly, the others who had changed, who had aged, would fall victim to the very same fate that had stolen such an amazing man from existence, whose beautiful mind and free spirit would never again roam the plains that he so loved. And what would become of the rest of them? He himself was changing, already so much more aged in comparison to the everlasting youth that his father had once possessed, but that he himself had never known. The same fate would surely befall him, and what of his own children? The ones he had raised and loved, mentored and bestowed with all of the knowledge his own father had gifted him? Lepisma, stricken by grief but driven by love, did what he had to do. It wasn't fair that their youth be ripped from them. He knew not what his kind had done to deserve this, but any crimes they could have committed would have been done by those before him. Those that came after should not be subject to the same fate. So, he made a deal. Nobody is sure how he found the entity, or what it could have possibly wanted with his soul, but Lepisma paid the ultimate price for the ultimate gift. The gift of knowledge. And, wanting to save his species from the horrible curse that plagued them, he began the tedious process of bestowing that knowledge upon others. As the role of tribe leader now rested heavily upon his shoulders, Lepisma began with those closest to him, his own tribe, and first and foremost, his own partners. The first to learn was Statota, a powerful sorceress with a mind as bright as her smile. With magical potential that rivaled even Lepisma himself, she took to the new magic as swiftly as the wind swept across the plains, and together they taught it to every individual capable in their tribe, finally reaping the fruits of their labor when another tragic passing was circumvented. Though changed, though the flesh still threatened to decay and the body remained feeble, the mind remained strong, intact, and the soul remained firmly within its vessel. Though they had to work through methods of vessel preservation, it had worked. They had finally rid themselves of the horrible curse that had befallen their people, and could finally spread it to all of the other centaur tribes that had spread across the land. But then Lepisma got sick. Very, very sick. It was an illness that no spell could cure, nor medicine could manage. To this day, nobody knows what happened, but very quickly, Lepisma passed. And yet it was no matter, for Statota knew just how to cure death itself. But there was a problem with this. For the payment of the entity's deal was Lepisma's soul itself, and yet it had been tied back to his vessel just as quickly as it had left. And this enraged the entity. He had been cheated out of his portion of the deal by a mere mortal, and in his fury he banished the entire tribe to the furthest plane he possibly could, dooming them to an unknown fate. But that's not where the story ends, of course. That unknown fate, as it turns out, was not nearly as bad as it could have been. In fact, this strange new plane that these centaurs found themselves on turned out to, in the end, be their sanctuary. Though they'd had to fight through the wilds, through all number of foreign, sporadic terrain, through monsters and beasts, the likes of which they'd never seen, it was all worth it in the end, because as they neared the center of the plain, things became more and more habitable. Sporadic terrain gave way to thick forest, and thick forest gave way to grassy hills and plains. Plains that weren't quite home, but would eventually become it. Their banishment had turned out to be a blessing, as they found themselves on a beautiful, magic-rich plain, with plains to gallop in, wild and free, with nothing and nobody to stop them. But this was not enough for some. Some missed the old way of life, and some had even come to embrace the strange cycle that other creatures went through, believing it to be the natural order of things, that if we were not meant to perish, then nature would not have let us. This line of thinking was only encouraged, and perhaps even spurred, by one person alone, a druid by the name of Fimatina, Lepisma's second partner. Though her love for Lepisma was strong, she had always been hesitant to accept the knowledge offered by the entity, believing that the price was too high for any offer, no matter how great. No matter what, she could not bring herself to believe that his soul was worth it, and, when the entire tribe had been banished, she found herself filled with rage. How dare they rip her away from her home, though she'd had nothing to do with it? How dare they defy the natural order, for if they were not meant to die, then they would not? These thoughts were enough to turn Fimatina away from her tribe altogether, and, along with the rest of those that shared her ideals, they retreated into the forest, never to return. As for the rest of us, though, we had some work to do. Hi, I'm Dop, and this has all just been an exceedingly long intro with context for today's lore dump. One might ask, wasn't that just an entire lore dump in and of itself? To which the answer is, probably yes, but today's a 2-for-1 deal since I disappeared for a whole damn month for artfight, so buckle up, grab a snack, make sure to hydrate, and let's get into the topic of today's video. The Metamorphosis! Yay! Okay, so it's obviously no big secret that my name, Lepidoptera, along with literally every other Gidan name, is a nod to an insect of some kind. There are reasons for this, namely that using a creature's true name in Sylvan, a very ancient and powerful language, can invoke the power that the name carries with it. But, of course, with how important the Metamorphosis is to Gidan society, we've all sort of just stuck to names that can invoke the power of the Metamorphosis itself. And what creatures change more in their lives than insects? Now, of course, today's lore dump isn't exactly about names and the reasonings behind them, but I'm sure there's at least some question as to why the Metamorphosis is called what it is, and that's a simple question to answer. When insects metamorphosize, it's not simply growing up, it's a rebirth. They break down their bodies and build them back again, better, stronger, and more equipped for the world they live in. They don't simply pass into adulthood, it is an active rite of passage where the insect finally becomes its true self that it was always meant to be. Similarly, in a Gita's life, the metamorphosis is a rite of passage into adulthood that requires the reconstruction of one's entire self, and along with it, one's body. Everyone's metamorphosis is different. Most people start the process voluntarily, consulting their local ferryman when their body begins to get too weak to sustain any longer. Some fall in battle, their childhood ended tragically early by some monster or beast, and rarely, some will wait until their body fails of its own accord, though this is highly uncommon because, quite frankly, you're gonna be stuck with that body for the rest of your life, and it really sucks to be brittle and frail for the next few hundred years. So, how does it work exactly? Well, when we first acquired the magic needed for the metamorphosis, all we really got was the knowledge needed to tie a soul back to its vessel, a process known as tethering. You see, when you die, it's not necessarily because your soul is expired, nor necessarily your body. Rather, it's what binds the two together, the tether that has been severed in some manner. Of course, the most common way for this to happen is that the body is no longer fit to hold a soul, but the reason that simply fixing the body won't bring the individual back to life is because once the tether is severed, the soul has nothing to keep it in place. So, awesome, we've got the magic and the knowledge to restore a tether, but if the body became unfit, what do you do to make it fit? That's where our own Gidan innovation came in. The problem was, if you tether a soul right back to the body that just became unfit, it's either nigh impossible to even do, or the tether will simply expire very, very quickly. After all, we only learned to tether the soul, not restore function to a body. So, problem. Bodies still decay and can't hold a soul properly. Solution? Make better bodies. In the beginning, body preservation methods were dubious, to say the least. Of course, some druids had some ideas for how to at least slow the process of decay, if not stop it altogether, but unfortunately the bodies of those who had passed had already weakened, just by nature of aging. They were frail, brittle, and would often find themselves injured. Their old bones simply couldn't keep up with the renewed vigor of their souls. So, powerful magic users began to experiment. I'm not nearly skilled enough with magic myself to even begin to explain the in-depth intricacies of how it works, but what I can say is that someone very, very smart and very, very powerful figured out a way to convert the fundamental building blocks of the body into that of something crystalline, flexible and supple as flesh but without any of the decay. Naturally, this new form would be unable to repair itself organically, but neither would dead flesh, and this form wouldn't start falling apart at a moment's notice. Now, of course, this wasn't an easy task by any means, nor was it done quickly. The process of creating a new tether was a challenge in and of itself, a ritual that took much time and much effort. But all of that time and effort doesn't even take into account the fact that you have to prepare the body first. At first, it was manageable for one person to do all by themselves, but as Gidan population grew, people who couldn't perform the metamorphosis began to outweigh those who could, and with the clock constantly ticking, even the most powerful individuals found themselves drained with all of the work they had to do. So, naturally, they needed help. As the founder had begun his journey up the spire that lay at the center of the plain, hoping to find something that may help his budding civilization, it left Toda alone with the responsibility to teach, to lead, and to resurrect. And as their population grew and grew, it left her utterly exhausted. Thus, she took on 8 apprentices with which to share the load, 2 to split the burden of each season, bringing rise to the tradition of each ferryman having around 8 metamorphic assistants to aid them in their preparations. Now comes the question, what do they, both metamorphic assistants and ferrymen alike, actually do? Of course, they bring people back from the dead to enjoy their many years of adulthood in a crystalline body, but what's the process? Naturally, the very first step is preparing the body, which is a process largely left to the assistants while the ferryman conserves their strength and manages day-to-day town business, as they are not only in charge of the metamorphosis, but their respective town as well. A body and its accompanying soul are first brought to the ferryman's sanctum. In most cases, this is a voluntary matter of someone going of their own accord, where the soul still remains within its vessel, the tether weak but not quite expired yet. In these cases, the individual is assisted in their passing however they feel comfortable, and then the soul is collected and stored, usually in a capable crystal, until the ferryman is ready for the metamorphosis. However, there are cases where a ferryman is called out in case of a suddenly severed tether, whether from illness or a horrible accident. In these cases, the soul is captured and contained by the ferryman, and the body is taken back to the sanctum and handled by the assistants from there. So, as soon as the body is received, the process of crystallization begins. It has to be done as soon as possible to prevent any disfigurement caused by decay, so the metamorphic assistants must work quickly and efficiently. First, the body is removed of its organs, as just about all of them will only serve as dead weight post-metamorphosis. Dead weight. However, one organ is left intact, as it is of the utmost importance when forming a tether: the heart. There is much speculation as to why exactly it serves the purpose that it does, but regardless of the reason, it has been found to be the only suitable long-term vessel for a soul, once crystallized. With the heart crystallized and dead weight removed, the rest of the body is crystallized as well, any incisions being sealed, though their visibility will depend entirely on the skill of the metamorphic assistant performing the task. Now safely preserved, the role of the metamorphic assistant is complete, and the body is laid on a designated altar in the sanctum, where others may lay in wait for the ferryman as well. From this point, all that's left to do is for the ferrymen to gather their strength and perform the metamorphosis itself, typically done on the final day of the week. But in the days between the crystallization process and the metamorphosis, the family of the metamorphosizing individual have a role to play as well. Though it's not necessarily a crucial part of the process, the tradition of adorning the body is a deeply meaningful practice. Throughout the days while the ferryman is preparing for the ritual, the family of the deceased decorate the body as well as the altar itself, surrounding them with things unique to each individual. Some may favor being decorated in handcrafted jewelry made by those they cherish dearly. Some may much prefer their altar to be covered with highly scented herbs and flowers, so that they may wake up to the smell and sight of nature. Depending on the time of year, some may even choose to decorate their loved one in the brightly pigmented body paints typically reserved for the Zephyrus festival, so that a particularly party-loving individual might be able to wake up ready to go and celebrate. Eventually, after about a week of crystallizing and preparing and decorating, it's time for the metamorphosis to actually occur. Whereas the sanctum has, to this point, been filled with the excited chatter of families awaiting their loved one's metamorphosis, the ferryman's ritual requires the utmost quiet for the sake of their concentration. Each body that is to be raised is moved to a circle of inscribed runes, typically having been etched into the floor of the sanctum itself so it can be used indefinitely without the need for reinscribing. Skilled ferrymen are capable of doing many at a time, the most powerful of them having been said to raise an entire sanctum's worth of Gita at a time. But of course, the amount of bodies risen at a time varies just as much as any part of this ritual. How many and how long will be up to many different factors, such as the power of the ferryman, which zone the ritual is taking place in, even simply the feistiness of the soul itself will play a part in how things go. But if all goes according to plan, it's as simple as releasing the soul from its temporary holding crystal and building a tether to its permanent crystal heart vessel with the ferryman's own magic. The sanctum is dead silent, everyone waiting with bated breath. The body is crystallized, the runes inscribed. So much time has gone into this moment. Days spent in preparation, decades of a life lived organically, with centuries of magical advancement all building up to this very second. Yet, for all the time and for all the effort, when a Gita opens their eyes for the first time as a metamorphosized individual, we've finally grasped what we set out for in the very beginning. Freedom. Complete and utter freedom. To run wild and free, to live life to its fullest and choose our own path on our own time, with nothing and nobody to stop us, not even death itself. And with that is where I'm gonna call it for today. Honestly, there's still a lot more that goes into the metamorphosis, but I'm gonna save that for another lore dump because I think that going through the history and the process is enough for one day, because otherwise this video would get way too long. So, next lore dump, I'll be diving into things like life post-metamorphosis, and different social expectations, how adventuring parties handle death when they're out of a ferryman's reach, so on and so forth. There's plenty more to cover, but we've covered plenty today, so if you liked this video, make sure to tune in for the next lore dump to hear more. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and silly stuff like that so you can see more of it, but most importantly, please comment if there's anything you particularly liked or would love to see. And as far as lore dumps go, if you have any questions or would like me to expand on a specific topic, I'll see what I can do to squeeze it into an upcoming lore dump. Alright, that's enough from me for today. Remember to take care of yourselves, everyone. Have a great day. I'm happy to be back, and I can't wait to see you all next time. Bye!